taxes, you know, I appreciate the fact that we're all making time for this particular meeting and moving forward with it. I'd like to call this meeting order at 12:10. With that being said, we're going to follow our typical protocol and our guidelines. Our first call to order will be the Pledge of Allegiance. Extend
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic one nation and God and justice for all.
And everybody can hear us okay, right? We're good with the volume? Okay, perfect.
I'm noticing one thing that we have two LC board staff. Yeah,
We do.
It's technical. I just to get myself to do more work.
Okay.
Yeah, she was going to call in from her office. I think she probably has it up running over there. She just decided to sit in here with us since we don't have as many people. So.
All right.
Okay.
With that being said, next call, I guess we'll go with a roll call. How would you handle this?
Okay.
Yeah, if you could just go through, poll everybody.
Adrian D. Trevino,
Here.
George Narvaez,
Here.
Omar Gonzalez Longoria,
Here.
Jose A. Lopez, Arturo Tomás Benavides, Elizabeth Alonso Villarreal,
Here.
Robert Jusen, Jose D. Gonzalez,
Present.
and Hector Cortez.
Is Mr. Lopez still on the board, on the committee?
Who was it?
Mr. Lopez? Jose, is he still?
Yeah, he's still in the board.
Okay,
Yes, a member.
okay.
We have a quorum, Mr.
We
Chairman.
do have a quorum. Thank you.
I remember.
Okay, moving right along. I'd like to, the next step would be approval of the minutes. We'd like to take a minute to review them. And if we are all in agreement, have a motion.
Motion to approve.
I second.
And catch that. Who motion?
Me.
Elizabeth?
Liz?
Second.
I second. Adrian.
Adrian. Okay. We'd like. Oh, I'm sorry. Well, I'd like to see if I can get a motion to approve the roll call for the absences.
Motion.
Second.
Liz and George a second. Okay. Moving right along, we'll go back to the minutes. I think we already have our motion established. Okay, is there anybody that'd like to have any discussion on this?
The only thing is on the minutes we received 2 pages. Is that correct?
And what, I'm sorry?
Number of minutes. I think 2 pages here.
Yeah.
Okay, and we're okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Agents, okay. They vote to approve the minutes then? All in favor, say aye.
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 Okay. Motion passes. Move forward.
So, actually, sorry, Mr. Chairman, citizen comments, I don't think.
No.
So we'll go right into the staff reports. Elsie, since you're here, do you want to, or I can discuss? As we looked at, you start through your packet, you go back, your first one you'll hit is the in-plane deployment report. Obviously, you can see the story that's being told here. We have a small presentation a little farther on in here to talk about some of the financial impacts, but you can see where we started to go into the COVID-19. We were actually up, moving into a good year, and as everybody knows, we're supposed to have our inaugural flight to Mexico City. but things changed obviously on a national, on a world level, and you can see as March started to hit. Obviously, as we get into April, that's not reflected on here yet as we still compile those numbers, but we're anticipating passenger traffic to be down about 95 to 97% across the board. So we've seen obviously the flight reduction, what the DOT levels are allowing with airlines that take CARES Act funding. So really what it comes down to today is we see an American flight, a United flight, once a day, where we were, typically 7 to 8, depending on if Allegiant was operating. Allegiant hasn't been operating through the month. They're required to start operating again. There are some new rules coming, though, from the DOT about possible exemptions, but we anticipate this Friday, or it's Friday, to be, they may switch the schedule back, maybe Thursday again now, to be the first Allegiant flight in pretty much over a month. So obviously nobody's traveling to Las Vegas when everything's shut down, but I think we're seeing some positive signs that the casinos are starting to put plans together to open, by the end of the month into the first week of June. So, we continue to track these numbers. There's a lot of experts saying a lot of different items, but obviously our traffic numbers reflect what's kind of going around the nation. People are, sheltering in place and they're not traveling except for necessity. So, as we move forward into cargo gross landing weight, you see the same reflection. We go into March, we take a severe dip, reflective obviously of what's happening not only here but in Mexico when they closed the automotive plants. Obviously I don't have to explain to everybody, how significant that is for our cargo operators here. So, we start to see that downward trend in March, 64% down. We're expecting that even further into April. Once again, the same with the airlines. We're seeing some positive signs as far as Mexico putting plans together by the end of the month to open auto manufacturing. So we're hoping to see that return. Our FedEx and our UPS carriers, we've been talking to them. They seem like they haven't been as affected as much, and they've been running their normal schedules on both those carriers. The FIS, we also have Walter Siebert here as well for a little bit later on to talk about, but, same story, traffic down. All these numbers are tracking similar in fashion. We've seen across the board, right? You don't have passengers, you don't have cargo, you don't have activity, people are sheltering in place. We start to see these numbers reflect lower. So it's kind of the story today. Like I said, we're seeing some positive signs, but hopefully moving forward, we'll see these numbers start to return. Same with the page 2, it's the same. Air charter, private passengers, we're looking into that, 70, 80, 90% down. Not just Laredo, it's aviation, airspace as we look at today. The same with the, we'll go back towards the FIS operations here. You see, April is in here, a 90% reduction for year to year of the activity over there. Same story. And then we look at the fuel flow activity report, down 53%. We do see, obviously, that we have the government operations still, right? Air and Marine, their mission has not changed. We have the military National Guard here. They're still flying at the same frequency, but obviously there's been a significant impact in fuel flowage here at the airport. No planes, fuel obviously going to be down. The distribution hasn't changed much, right? Signature is still our main fuel supplier here at the airport, with Barker being in second there. IBC only doing in-house for their own aircraft. Delinquent report, I think we've been successful when you look at this number, considering the economic factors. I mean, obviously, like most airports these days, we have both the aeronautical impact, which we've seen, and the non-aeronautical, right? We've been sheltered in place. We've closed down things like the restaurant within the terminal. And if you look here where we see, past due amounts, it's really around those companies that have greatly affected, right? Not all suffering is equal at the moment. Some companies we've actually been approached to do some leases with some outside companies. So, there's some economic trends here that are better, but generally speaking, we've seen a reduction in everything. Less passengers, less people renting cars. I mean, you've seen the parking lot today. We're letting the auto enterprise, Avis, stage their vehicles in the parking lot. So it just goes back to limited activity, and we're balancing that. I hate to say, any time in my life to tell people not to travel, but I think, obviously there was appropriate measures taken. But the message that we've been trying to give is that we're here. Elsie, myself, Alejandro, everybody in the department has been working hard to offset what we see in the economic impact here with the, potential grants and grants that we have received. So we'll talk a little bit further about that impact as we move along here, but any questions? I believe that's the last page here on the report.
I have a question on,
sorry.
in consideration of circumstances, I know in delinquent especially, you plan on extending and giving a little bit more leniency?
So we do. We actually have a plan here that we'll put up for everybody to kind of take a look at what we would propose that we can do for, the tenants here at the airport. Obviously, with the CARES Act, there's been a lot of questions from the tenants of what we can do for them. And we have put together a plan for your review and potentially now then move into the city council approval. But I know Elizabeth.
Yes, yeah.
Elizabeth, do you have a question?
Yes, I know that, because of this COVID situation, do you know if, I know the small businesses like Via Laredo, and I don't know about the other ones, but maybe Laredo Duty Free and all. Do you know if they applied for the PPP loan?
They have. Elsie's been in constant contact with them. We don't know, obviously, their status. They don't know at this point. We all know, we see the national news where, the funds initially ran dry and then there was more funds distributed to it. So I know that some of these have, some of them, have not, but we have not, at least I have not been told anybody has been successful in obtaining a grant or a loan.
Yeah, not yet. And speaking, for example, with the local restaurant here for the terminal, I understand they did apply. They're in the process of set up federally. Like Beth mentioned, the first round, the funds were basically exhausted within days. And so they weren't able to be in that first round. I believe they're part of the second round of potential funding. So they're waiting to hear more from their accountant and their banker to see.
Okay, because I just wanted to let you all know, and especially since you all are business people, right now, actually, and right after this meeting, I'm gonna tag on to another training. We're part of NALCAB out of San Antonio, National Association of Latino Community Asset Builders. And we are working to reach out to the local businesses for those who might have not applied, or they're, I know the first round, it went pretty quick. We were lucky to apply for it, and we did get it. Also the EIDL, we applied for that. But just so you know, but I'll have more information for you, and I'd like to share with you that NeighborWorks Laredo is going to be doing some outreach on, I know it's not going to be, it's a short project because I think the deadline is June 30th, but we're going to try to get the word out there. So if you all know of any businesses that were left out or didn't apply, refer them to us, but I'll provide you with that information.
Thank you, Liz. If you can,
yeah,
that will be very useful, and we'll go ahead and share that with the tenants that we have.
okay.
We have also been participating with our local economic development task force in this matter. Jeff and I, as an airport, we participate in that conference call that's held just about every week.
We're going on right now as we speak. So.
Yes. So Teclo Garcia is spearheading that with the different small business and development groups, Economic Development Corporation, Chamber of Commerce, and whatnot. So definitely we'll share with them as well.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right.
One thing maybe I want to verify with legal as well, because I think there's an 8-week window to ensure that the funds are spent on payroll and rent. So you might want to clarify that to ensure that we can get some more funding as well.
Right, and I think when we get into a little bit later on and talk about the economic incentive package, what Elsie and myself have formulated really focuses on a deferral program versus a waiver program. to exactly that point, because we don't know what their financial impacts will look like as grants and loans come in. And but as far as the staff reports, we do have, I mean, everybody is aware that Mr. Labrada is out. We do have RS&H on the line, and I don't know if John Hipshin, if you can give us a status report on the cargo 11, 12, 13, and 14.
Yep, sure. So phase 11 and 12 are, they're all part of one grant, and they're both complete, 100% complete as far as construction, and have been reopened. We just, the final paperwork, record drawings, and closeout report to the FAA, but they are open and complete from a construction standpoint. Phase 13, we're at about 30 to 35% complete at this point. That's more on the southeast side of the cargo apron, kind of where that old asphalt was. That's what they're working on right now. And that's anticipated to be complete towards the end of April. So about a year from now, that one should be complete. And then phase 14, we are at our 90% design and looking to get that one bid here. It should go out for advertisement for the first advertisement on June 2nd with a bid opening June 25th. And then we'll be looking for an FAA grant sometime in August and September. And,
okay. Go ahead, John.
I was going to say, as far as the budget on that one, I think we're looking at approximately about a $15 to $16 million project. There's various alternates in that one, so we're going to maximize as much FAA funding as we can get into that one. Flexibility of award to be based on the FAA funding that becomes available. So that finishes up the, there's a little bit on the south side, and then is an expansion to the north. So that should finish up pretty much everything that's anticipated as far as the cargo apron expansion. So from an FAA funding standpoint, that should be the last phase.
And as we talk to the FAA, the conversation has been with the CARE Act is separate. So the funding for those projects should still be separate from that, which is good. So the $18.5 million is separate from what we see on the construction at the cargo apron. And I know we had a slowdown. It was only a few days, I believe, where Ream Construction was not here, correct? They had sent employees home, but other than that, it picked right back up and we're on track.
Correct. They did shut down, but I think it was less than a week. They started to get some COVID illnesses, and but yeah, they started up, I think, the Monday after that. So from a schedule standpoint, we are on schedule.
Okay, perfect. Is there any questions on the cargo construction project? I do apologize if anybody speaks up. We're having some technical difficulties that we're rolling through at the moment. So there's a question out there.
Yeah, I think Ms. Bostad is trying to share something.
Yeah.
Got it.
Okay.
So you should be able to
Yeah,
see,
so
do you see the slide that says current construction projects?
Yep.
Okay, good. Okay, so that's the one that John mentioned that we're complete on. So that one, we've been working for the last year on that section.
So another component with this is, and John, you could talk maybe a little bit about it as well. The 2020 grants as part of the CARES Act are 100% funded by the FAA, where typically it's 90-10. And that should be on top of what we've been secured here as an airport, correct? The grant.
Correct. So yeah, that the phase 13. This is that's phase 13. Phase 14 is the one that we're going out for bid, and correct. That should be 100% funded, as most FA 2020 grants are now eligible for. But yes, that should be separate discretionary money aside from the $18 million in CARES Act money that the airport got. So we're still in line for discretionary funding for this project. And yeah, that's the good news, that it could be at 100% funding.
So that's important. There's a $500 million as part of the CARES Act for fiscal year 2020 grants to the FAA. So it's just, not that this is the number, but if it was $4 million and we took $400,000 from our operating revenue to match the 10%, we won't have to do that for that grant for the 2020. As long as that, it's going to be equitable through all the airports, but as long as the money is still there and available. So the conversations we've had so far is that will be another positive impact to the budget.
And that, those funds that you receive, I know that there's time frames that are kind of hard to meet right now due to the fact that the construction process. Is they extending those, or is there any way that we could just get the money and lose it? Or
no? So the same timeline, the same schedule. If anything, they're more reduced. Are being followed in regards to grants. Everything's fast. They're trying to get the CARES Act money out and utilize.
But part of our conversation with the FAA, which I think as an advisory board and as a city that we've done successfully, is we've championed that message to the FAA that we're not slowing down with our CIP, where a lot of communities have stopped and said, hey, wait a second, let's hold off. And now that puts the FAA into a position where they're saying, okay, well, if, you know, X city is not going to commit money to do their CIP, but Laredo is going to do it, you know, we haven't slowed down, we haven't stopped. And our projects are continuing online. Elsie, myself, RS&H, you know, we're in constant contact with, you know, the suppliers, with the construction companies to make sure that our projects are on track and making that commitment to the FAA that we are committed to our CIP over the next 5 years, which I think puts them at ease and gives us this opportunity to get these extra funds that, you know, maybe some other cities are feeling a little apprehensive about at the moment. So that I think as long as we continue that message, we haven't seen a slowdown in our activity with the construction, and it will give us an opportunity to get some extra funding than we normally would.
Especially right now with the pandemic. I mean, we continue to monitor on a daily basis through our consultants and our staff on the construction site itself as well. There was only, for this entire time, they've been nonstop. They've been a great team. They're following, you know, there's within the boundaries, they're following the safety protocols that are in place now, social distancing, wearing a mask if needed. But other than, I think, 2 weeks or 1 week.
Wasn't even that. It was, I think it's less than a week that they Ream Construction had sent their employees home. I think it was around, John, 3-4 days. And as far as we know, it's not a big impact or any impact to the process or the timeline.
We're still.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, I would say it really hasn't affected the schedule. So we're still looking towards the end of April to get phase 13 done.
Taking into consideration the circumstances, well, are there contingency plans to hold them accountable to make sure they got a contingency plan to continue working if they do have another circumstance?
So when it did happen, when there was the conversation, I think the FAA has, when we talked to them, there hasn't been an official stance on leeway, but, you know, we've talked about this with the noise program. And when we first had the shutdown, we said, hey, if they're out for 2-3 weeks, can we look at an extension of that project? Because it's also a hard thing, especially when you start talking. At that point, when they weren't here, you know, city government officials were really focusing on staying at home and not going out. So it's hard to put that onto, you know, the construction company. But the conversation that we've had with the FAA has been very supportive. And I think, you know, obviously nothing's guaranteed, but if we were to run into a situation where for some reason the construction company had to go out for months on end, I think we could come to some resolution with the FAA on what that would look like potentially. But, you know, knock on wood, I feel like we've kind of turned that a little bit. And really where we saw those 3 days of slow or no activity was during, you know, the apex of this event. Any more questions on the construction?
Okay, Chairman, if we may, I would like to ask if we can move up the item in regards item 4 for SCVP, we have Supervisor for Customs at the FIS, Walter Siebert, here as a guest. And
You need
if
a
he could tell us a little bit more about what is he seeing from his end. They've been a great support, and his staff has been continuously working 24/7 nonstop. They're essential employees, federal employees, and I think it's very valuable that you get to hear from his end of what they're seeing right now.
Just move forward then. Yes, sir.
Stop sharing.
All right. Good morning, everybody. Supervisor Siebert from the airport. So I created some spreadsheets to compare private aircraft traffic from this calendar year 2019 and 2020. And so we can, if we just look at, let's see, March, let's start off with February. If you look at the numbers from 2019 in February, we had 147 private aircraft. And in 2020, we had 180 aircraft, private aircraft. And so that was an increase actually of 22.4%. In March, we're still looking at an increase. We had 122 in 2019 and 164 in 2020 for an increase of 34.4%. Then in April, that's when it really hit us hard with this COVID-19 pandemic. In April of 2019, we had 143. We had 143 private aircraft, and in 2020 we had only 19, which brings us down to negative 86.7%. You want me to? Okay. So in cargo, of course, it's more. There's a lot more information because we have cargo inbound, cargo outbound, and then we also have the joint inspections with the SAT, the Mexican Customs. So if we look at the month of January, we did see a decrease starting in January, but that was probably because
in Mexico they had some.
Yeah, so we had some factors that affected the traffic, such as the strikes in Mexico, and then the finalization of the USMCA, and then in February it wasn't that bad. March, when all this started, we see the cargo number go down to negative 63.5, and then in April the numbers went drastically low, where we see a decrease in 90.8% of air traffic. Right now in May, just recently we've started seeing an increase. I mean, there were some days and some shifts where we have 3 shifts, 8 to 4, 4 to 12, and midnight to 8. And sometimes you'd see one plane, private plane, because almost all cargo is down to nil. But we're starting to see a little bit of an increase in traffic. Sometimes we'll see 2, 3 planes per shift. The cargo traffic still hasn't picked up. We've had a few empties go southbound, and we've seen. I think you also wanted to mention that we have seen some shipments for medical equipment that one of the Mexican carriers, TSM, had brought to distribute to. I want to say it was in Toledo, Ohio.
Yeah.
And then,
Safety equipment.
all right. It was I want to say.
Mask.
Yeah, it was a PPE mask. And then we also saw TSM also exported a shipment of fabric to make more medical masks, which was okay with CBP. we are on the lookout for any PPE being exported out of the country. So that didn't fall under PPE because they weren't. It was just the fabric. But had it been any actual PPE, we would have had to notify our chain of command and then find out if it would be authorized to be exported out of the country.
And Walter, and that's because the priority is being given for the U.S.
Yes, exactly.
to legalize.
So I believe President Trump, I forgot what act he enacted, but basically he was saying he stated that all medical equipment that's going to be used for this pandemic has to stay in the United States, and so that's why we would have to run this up the chain of command, probably all the way to headquarters, and find out if any type of equipment would be authorized for exportation.
And I think it's important to know that although there's been, as some of you have already know, there's travel restrictions for in and out of the country. Tourism is basically non-approved. It's only essential travel for even on the bridge, but also through air. The same applies. So the work that the staff is doing at CBP and Mexican Customs as well that are there is very important. Items as cargo are considered essential, so that hasn't been restricted. But all this influx of movement of PPEs and that's why cargo is critical to not just the U.S. but also Laredo, and I think that's why we've seen the difference in the different regulations.
You know, I could add as well. I know there's a couple of topics. Taking into consideration that you see the big numbers being dropped. I know automotive has shut down its plant, so that's a big factor. They're reopening here, I believe, next week, so that's a positive. So we should help the flow of the staff movement as well, because they're one of the 5 major items that are allowed. Taking into consideration that, but I know that maybe we could do a push to maybe include the medical equipment, because that's not on that list. And I think that's a huge opportunity to sit there and move forward, because, I mean, this is, when in time of a crisis, I think it's an opportunity for us. I think we should take advantage of that. You know, so. And especially on PPEs, just to add a little bit more on that, there is a process. Guidelines have been set down. I know Mexico and Canada have not been affected. They're more working on the Chinese. There is a letter of attestation that hits submitted to FEMA. So, I mean, there's guidelines, but I'm sure you can deal with the customs officials that work on it, because they are scrutinizing, they are verifying all the products to ensure that we have the majority staying in the United States.
Good point.
That any of the members might have for Mr. Sieber, for CBP?
No, none here.
No, not me. Thank you.
No.
Line, and you have had some situations where some of your officers have been affected, so I know you guys are right there at keeping everybody out. So, I mean,
and keeping us safe, really.
Keeping us safe.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, we're blessed to work here at the airport. Myself, my partner, and my team, we're not as exposed as the people that work at the bridges. We're, as always, the airport. We strive to give provide excellent service, not only to represent our port, but to represent the city of Laredo as well.
Thank you. And it's to the note on safety and security. It's not on the agenda, but I just wanted to recognize this week is Police Week, and I wanted to take this opportunity to recognize all of our law enforcement officers that work at our airport continuously. They've been very dedicated through this pandemic. All of airport police has been working through it all. They're essential staff, and they've been very, very supportive of keeping everyone safe and secure. The airport still continues to work. Nonetheless, it's no different than any other day on a 24/7 basis. Even administration might be a little bit different for the non-essential staff, but airport police has been through it all here every day, if not more. So I just want to take this opportunity to recognize all of our law enforcement during Police Week.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And the work we have here on the meeting, Chief De Hoyos, he's on the call, and thank you, De Hoyos, for keeping everyone, continue to coordinate all the efforts as well with TSA.
Thank you.
That's it for the staff report.
Thank you, Mr. De Hoyos.
Thank you, sir.
We moved up, Ms. Siebert to speak. I know you're more than welcome to stick around and stay for our meeting, or if you want to say we're going to move forward. So thank you for that.
If you do go, make sure you grab
We appreciate the information you provided. Very, very valuable.
Thank you all for the invite. Have a great day. Stay safe. Stay well.
Thank you. Okay, moving right along. Start off with a resolution. It's not a motion. This is just an adjustment, right?
Yeah, so it's to officially accept, consider recommendation to the mayor and city council to authorize the city manager to submit for grant application to the Federal Aviation Administration in the estimated amount of $18,506,692 for the Laredo International Airport, and authorizing the city manager to execute all necessary documents, appropriate budget resulting from the award offer. The purpose of this grant is to provide funding for which the airport funds may be lawfully used, as found in the Office of Airports Revenue Use Policy, such as airport operating expenses to include payroll, airfield safety, airport security, and terminal maintenance. No local match is required. Federal grant funding is available under the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security CARES Act 2020. This is kind of retro. We went through this process. City manager has signed the grant. The funds have been loaded for airport use. It is a reimbursement program. We do have a presentation as we go down a little bit farther here about the impact, the financial impact here, and the CARES Act funding itself. But I will say, thank you to the team here at the airport and the Airport Advisory Board, the chairman. We were successful, very successful in federal funding. The airport's actually received more federal funding than Brownsville, McAllen, and Corpus Christi combined. So it does give us, I think, some opportunities to help here a little bit with some of, the economic issues that we're seeing with our tenants, and will allow us to kind of move forward with our operating expenditures as we have been in the past. So, I mean, obviously you've seen the impact up front here from the coronavirus, but working with, Congressman Coyer's office, with everybody in this room, I think that, we're all doing a really good job to keep, this pandemic to a place where maybe we could see some opportunities for the airport to come out of this with some growth. And in this case, for the resolution.
Yes.
Does it require?
We just need a motion.
You need a motion? You need a motion?
Yeah.
Liz?
Yes.
A second?
I second. This is Adrian.
Adrian? All right, anybody like to have any discussion on this matter? No discussion?
We're good?
Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No. We're good.
Okay.
No discussion.
All in favor, say aye.
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 Any nay votes? Resolution passes.
And if we, Mr. Chairman, could table number 2. We've talked to purchasing, and there's a couple other requirements that they're requesting of us. So we want to table 2 and come back to it for next month.
Okay, perfect. We'll, the motions and table 2 will go, item 2 will go ahead and table it for next month. Let's leave it with one motion, so we'll go ahead and.
No.
Okay, perfect. So this is to consider a recommendation to the mayor and city council to authorize the city manager to establish guidelines for COVID-19 economic relief program for concession and lease agreements located at the Laredo International Airport. Funding is available in the Airport Operations Fund from the FAA CARES Act grant. And what we would like to do, Mr. Chairman, is go through a presentation on the COVID-19 update, and then go into what, on a screen share and what you have in person there, what this economic incentive package would look like for our tenants. Okay. Okay. So, we touched on this when we looked at the report earlier. This has also been given to city management. We're 42% down in April for total revenues collected, 38% down on commissions for car rental, 62% down on cargo landing fees, 33% down on passenger landing fees, 54% down on fuel flow fees, and $1,236,792 revenue down year to date as an impact of COVID-19. And as we talked about before, not necessarily something that's unique to Laredo. This is happening across the country. We go to the next one. So the expenditure report, you can see in the bottom right there, obviously to Elsie's point earlier, we're federally obligated to continue to operate. We do have essential services coming in. We have families coming in, to people that have been impacted by COVID-19. We do see a lot of the one-way trucking, right, interstate commerce. So we're here, we're operating, but we have to operate in a safe environment. I know, Mr. Chairman, you were in this morning, you've seen the plexiglass that's been putting up, the hand sanitizer stations. The bottom right picture is actually a company that came in and did a desanitizing of the entire terminal for us. You can see the expenses here of what we've done to date. As a city, we're taking these and we're collecting them by each department and giving them to the city's finance department for potential FEMA reimbursement.
Are we supposed to be seeing something? Because I don't see anything.
Oh, okay, yes, you should.
Adrian and George, are y'all seeing the presentation? Or you couldn't? Oh, no, okay.
No, I don't see nothing.
Can you see it now?
No.
Still nothing? Okay.
Do you see it now? You should be seeing a blue screen that says expenditure report at the top.
Nope. I just see a little mouse going back and forth.
That's little cursor moving back and forth.
That second. That says share drop down. Is that?
That one's there?
Yeah.
Okay. Share content. And then share screen one. Can you see it now?
There you go.
Yes. Got it.
Yes.
Okay.
Can you, Ashley, can you back up one slide just so they can see what we were talking about?
Sorry about that, Jeff.
Oh, no.
No, thank you for letting us know.
And I do apologize. This is our first time. Next month we'll have it down pat. But this is just what verbally I was talking about before with the numbers. I think I read verbatim what you see on the screen here. Obviously, in the bottom. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, we saw that. I heard that, what you were saying.
So in the bottom right corner, I just wanted to highlight, if you haven't done it yet, if you haven't gone to our new website did kick off. We're still waiting on the cost comparison calculator to be added to that, but we're promoting this message, stay strong, we'll make it through, and that as an airport with a community that we're here and we're ready for when people want to return to travel, or even today for those essential needs. But we are promoting this message along. It is on our website. So if you haven't had a chance to look at the new website, I would suggest it's a lot better than where we were, 8,000 times better. So if you haven't, please take a look.
And then also, we've included a new social media pages.
Yep.
So we're trying to pass on a lot of the day-to-day activity and messages that are coming in. Information, up-to-date information regarding COVID. Please follow us on Facebook and Twitter and whatever your social media preference is, because that's really where you're going to get the day-to-day information as it's happening, and it's really important because there is a lot of changes. The airlines keep changing their hours, and as we progress, it's still subject to change. They're really reviewing their flight times on a weekly basis, and so there's going to be a lot of movement. So we encourage everyone to please keep up with that information through the different outlets that we provide, the official website and the official social media.
Ashley. So we were talking about this. You can see the expenditures. As I was saying, it's stuff that we are collecting, each one of these items. We're coding it as a coronavirus expense and sending it along to finance. For the city as a collective total, to potentially get FEMA reimbursement. But the CARES Act does allow us to submit expenses that we've had for that month. We can't submit for lost revenue, but we can submit for expenses. So with the CARES Act, it's not an $18.5 million check that's given to us. It's a reimbursement program up to $18.5 million. So Elsie and myself are working to maximize that, and we don't see any potential pitfalls with collecting that full $18.5 million through operating expenses. So Congressman Cuellar announced the $18.5 million grant for Laredo International Airport. Another important note here, as everybody on the call knows, typically we're a 90-10 with a grant. This is 100% with no local match. Grant will allow airports like ourselves to utilize the operational expenses for the maintenance, the personnel, continue to maintain safety and security operations and capital improvements. Basically anything that we spend today as an expenditure, a utility bill, a staff member, contracts, we can get reimbursement through the CARES Act, and that should be pretty close to immediate with the FAA. There's not a month, 2 months, 3 month wait process to get reimbursed.
And this, so you know, even though we just got the award, which is great news for us, it actually goes, unlike other grants, this one goes retroactive all the way back to January 20th of 2020.
Yep.
So right now, we're working with finance to start preparing our first request for reimbursement, and we're looking maybe around close to $1.5 million request for reimbursement through the CARES Act. It's a really good opportunity, and FAA has been nothing but supportive, and they're really working hard with us so those monies can get back to the communities and to the airports on an expedited basis.
Is that it?
Yeah.
Okay, so can you pull up the
Yeah.
So to the motion itself, what we wanted to talk about was the economic relief program proposal that we've put together for your review. And to the points that were made earlier about do we know what other funding sources local entities may have been trying to obtain, or when we started to look at that, we started to talk to other airports across the country. We're getting a lot of requests to waive rent. Our plan doesn't have anything in there about waiving rent or tenants. What it really focuses on is a stimulus package of deferred rent. So each section here, everybody's a little bit different, which is why you see, a little bit of a different program for each, depending on whether you're a restaurant or you're a passenger or advertising concession. But and everybody on the call can see this, right? The Word document.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Okay. So really, what it focuses on is, let's take the restaurant for instance. Rather than waiving that rent, that we would work with them on an individual basis. This isn't carte blanche. Everybody gets, an incentive of deferred rent. And you basically have to show to us as an airport that, you're in hard economic times, that you're suffering. So the restaurant, for instance, has been closed for the last month and a half permanently. Since March. And so obviously, they furloughed their employees. They're not here at all. What we would look at for them is a deferral rent up to 5 months, and then we would put in a 12-month installment plan. So they would pay back those months with no interest to the airport over a 12-month period following that. At the end of their contract, at the end of the restaurant contract with the airport, we would go through the advisory board and through city council to extend their lease at the current terms for the amount of time that we deferred, the rent. So in this case, if they got 5 months deferral, we would add that at the end of their lease contract to give them time to recuperate those funds potentially that they've missed by being closed here. So it's not a full-out waiver. They're still obligated to pay to the airport. I think this falls in line with what we've seen in the industry and also what we've seen here as a community. You know, we don't want to find, I think, ourselves in a position where, you know, because you're an airport tenant, you get, you know, rent waived, but if you're with a city and you're a city tenant, that you're not getting your rent waived. So I think this finds a happy medium. It helps with some of the suffering that we've seen out there, but it's fair and something that we can put across the board with all of our tenants, because everyone has a little bit of a unique, different circumstance of what they're requesting. I guess I leave it to the floor for questions.
You know, first of all, taking consideration is PPP, are you going to put some kind of clause or an aggressive stance, because some of that funding is to be used for rent, so.
So, I'm sorry, the question again is for
the PPP funding that some of the companies are receiving.
Yes, yeah. So I think when we look at the deferral program, it's because we're not waiving that it can take us a step back, and we don't have to necessarily be as aggressive to say, oh, you got a loan, now pay us your rent. With this program, it's pay us your rent in this, you know, this program. And obviously things that we would take into consideration when we look at approving an individual tenant are, have they been in good standing? You know, if they're not in good standing, obviously that's something that we would take into consideration before we would approve any type of a deferral.
It really goes on a, within keeping economically fairness, it's on a case by case, and they do have to, they would follow an approval process. They would have to submit a request in writing. It's not an open blanket. It's not an open check either.
Right.
It's really, it's an economic tool, a relief package that we're trying to put together for our community. And, you know, we've been working, Jeff and I, on a weekly basis, sometimes 3 times a week, with the different airports around the country, small-sized airports to large hubs, and in this falls in line with what Jeff mentioned as an industry standard. And there is still federal requirements that, you know, require us to still follow certain protocols. So this package it's meant to still fall in line with that, while still be able to help the community. And what we want is for the businesses to come back to work, if, you know, eventually to not just normal, but also progress from, you know, and do better. And you mentioned PPEs. I mean, they're still going to have to follow safety standards coming back to work as they come progressively start opening back up, like the restaurant. You know, right now there is a city ordinance that even though it's not mandatory and there's no fines now for, like the governor said, for not wearing a mask, for city facilities, you still have to wear a mask. And for restaurants, I think a lot of, also the customer trends are very important, because a lot of people, I think, feel more comfortable if say, like the waiters is wearing a covered face, you know, things like that. All of those things are being taken into consideration by the different organizations that work on an airport terminal, as well as outside and on the aprons. The FBOs have been taking a lot of safety precautions themselves, you know, more hand sanitizing, you know, not approaching the pilots as they were before, sometimes not even having the interaction with the pilots anymore, or having them be more self-serve, if you will. So a lot of all these things, I think it needs to just make business sense, common sense, if you will, as well.
Right, and you know, even if for something were to come down the road, I mean, we could even look at amending as we go into, to your point, Mr. Chairman, of adding in some language that, you know, we could start to assess, you know, late fees if the terms are not agreed to, or something along those lines to make sure that, you know, people are actually following through with the logic. But, you know, we've had tenants ask us for, you know, rent waivers for 6 months. And then we've had a tenant ask for, give us 20% off on our rent. So when we start talking about a waiver program, I think that's where we really start to go down that rabbit hole of, okay, now we really need to manage, to your point, are you getting extra money, or, you know, are you doing potentially something with a grant, or are you letting employees go? So I think the deferral program allows us to give people some ease and some rest, and it allows us to still operate because we have the CARES Act funding for the interim. So we have those funds to help with the expenses today, and give a little bit of reprieve without saying you don't have any obligations. The obligations are still there. It just gives them some opportunity to recuperate potentially the lost time.
And the small businesses will still be able to apply. This is in addition to the funding that is out there as well. So this takes into consideration some of that as well, that they have to, not everyone's hurting in different ways, but some are not hurting as much as others, right? And so this would, the diligence of providing that financial hardship would fall on the tenants and to demonstrate that, to let us know that they need that, because maybe they did get an award or large award and they're okay, it's financially solvent.
Right. I mean, it goes back to right now, us even in the middle of a negotiation for a potential new lease. So if somebody in this current climate is looking to get into a lease, obviously this package doesn't make sense for them. And I think this gives us the opportunity to narrow it down on an individual basis and decide, really what that impact was for them. Because we know, all of us just being here with, when we see these numbers, who's really being impacted at the moment. There's some anomalies out there, but this will give us some tools to be able to dive into that a little bit and give people an opportunity for a little bit of relief without waiving their obligations to us as a city.
Just put a little clarity on this. Not to sit there as I'm recommending a more aggressive approach. I just know that there's certain guidelines that they can get waived if they make payments which qualify for the payroll, and especially with a rent within that 8-week time frame.
Right.
So just to let them know that they're aware of it, if they get to the end and they haven't spent all that money, they could apply for another rent, and they're aware that they can get that loan relieved, or the PPP, the payroll protection plan, to allow them to go ahead and not have to pay that money back to the government. Kind of benefit the smaller people, especially the ones that really need it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Is there other questions on? Is there any other questions on the deferral package?
Let me ask you, this is Adrian. What about the tenants that are delinquent now? How would this package fall into those entities that are delinquent?
Right. I honestly, and honestly, I have talked about this a little bit. I think on the ones that are, and we're right. If we're having already in a legal conversation with them about delinquency before we went into COVID-19, I don't see why they would fall. There's obviously something that was going on before we got into this environment. So I think that goes back to those individual cases. And as an airport director, I wouldn't feel comfortable giving a deferral plan to somebody that potentially is not paying us in good times. But.
Yeah. So the package is not an open-ended, just the deferral is based on when the COVID started. So
yeah, I know.
Go back to if there's somebody delinquent as of March till today, that's where this referral will go ahead and take into account those rents. Now, again, this is subject to approval by City Council. Hasn't been approved because we have been getting a lot of calls and a lot of emails requested, but this is a proposed plan. And so, but it takes into account going retroactive to March through July.
Got it. Thank you.
So just to be on the clear, so you're deferring months, you're deferring rents for 5 months?
Up to 5 months.
Excuse me?
Up to 5 months. We would, when we look again on a macro level, those individual businesses, we would do a deferral potentially up to 5 months, but it could, if we start to see a turnaround in traffic, as Walter talked a little bit about, with maybe like an FBO, it may be more of like a 3-month deferral, and I think that's a conversation, but no more than 5.
Then I would recommend that you put on there up to, because I'm reading it as 5 months. And I mean, if you're going before the City Council, but okay, so let's assuming, yes, it's 5 months. So those 5 months, they're still owed because, they're occupying the lease. So they won't start paying back, and this will be in installments until October?
Yes,
so in other words, the 5 months that they owe, let's say $1,000 a month, just on the, so those $5,000 would be paid back in 12 monthly installments starting in October?
Yes.
Okay. All right. I just wanted to get that clear.
Right, absolutely, yeah. And like I said, I think when you look at, it's not carte blanche, everybody gets this. If this is approved today and then through city council, it's a program that allows a tenant to call us and say, I'm having problems, I'm having issues, I can't, the city's told me to close, and we know that in some of our non-aeronautical tenants, gives us some tools in our toolkit to help them to look at their particular history to say, okay, they have been a good tenant, they've been a good tenant up to this point, what's the lease look like, and then we would obviously go through these same motions through here to extend the lease on a particular point. So when you look at who we would do this with, it's not, it wouldn't be done in the dark. Everybody would be fully aware, and we would come back to obviously amend the lease type of situation to add that time in at the end, which would run through this process, and the same down with city council. So decisions obviously wouldn't be made in a vacuum here about who we're deferring for, but really it's an opportunity, I think, for us with those tenants that are hurting. And, in particular, when I look at like a FedEx or UPS, from the activity that I'm seeing, I don't necessarily think that they would be a part of this program. They've continued with their normal aircraft, and if anything, with the online orders, I think globally UPS is up 20%. I don't know what they look like on a local level. We've been trying to get a little bit of a deeper dive into that, but I wouldn't see necessarily a UPS or FedEx being a part of this. I mean, obviously they would be open to come and talk to us if they're having issues, but go ahead.
If I may, I think definitely the reasoning on starting, for example, October, I think we all can understand that just because people start traveling again doesn't mean they're going to start traveling in June at what the numbers that we were looking at before the pandemic started. Activity is still lower. I think it's going to take time for the industry to recuperate from this. I think there's a lot of states that still have restrictions on traveling or activity on that particular city. So when we're talking air travel, we can't look at it as it's just Laredo is back open, Texas is open, and we're good to go. When we're talking about passenger air travel or activity at an airport, we have to understand that there's a lot of other variables that we need to take into account. So although right now we're continuing operations for travel, you see it right now where there's been restrictions on traveling in quarantine when they're coming into Texas from out of state, or when the passenger confidence to re-get into an airplane. We're taking all those things into consideration. And there's a lot, really. Jeff and I have been really breaking our heads and really working with all of our stakeholders and really working with the industry and our peers and the different airport directors and the association that we're part of to really come out with a comprehensive plan that makes sense for our community, for our airport and our needs. Because for example, the restaurant, if they come back and open in July, that doesn't mean that they're going to be ready to start paying on an installment plan in July 1st. It's going to take time for them to be able to make do with their payroll and come back and actually on a positive. So we think that giving them some time, reasonable amount of time to come back, work, be able to make their expenses, continue operations and provide a service, and then start making their installment plan at a reasonable amount of time. And it coincides also with our fiscal year. October is the start of our fiscal year as well. So we think that gives them enough time to start bringing back operations without breaking them back. Because the last thing we want is to come back and work, but in the process get in a hole. We don't want them to do that either.
Right. We want to find a happy medium where this delinquent report doesn't grow to the extent because, the numbers, obviously, as you've seen, it paints a bleak moment right now. And I think we're starting to see some indicators that some stuff is coming back, as like Walter said. But we want to help everybody here and help our tenants be able to get back up and give them that boost without waiving that obligation, but giving them the responsible ones, giving them the time they need, so we don't end up in a position where, you know, we have a lot of businesses here in default.
Jeffrey, this is George.
George?
Yeah, I think this is a good proposal, because this is what I would suggest to call a necessary evil. Because even though you're going to defer for 5 months, but if you don't give these people a window or a door to come back and open up without having an extended amount to pay up, you know, the past fees, they won't be able to open up. And all these, like the car rental, the restaurant, the advertisements, I mean, all these are needed for the people to feel at ease and start opening up and start traveling again, considering that the president opens up, you know, the economy. But I think this will be something that we need to do. At least that's my opinion, in order to help the economy and the airport. Done.
Is there any more discussion on this?
So that sounded like a motion, Mr. Narvaez.
I don't know.
Yeah, if you want to, it will be a motion. I propose a motion to pass it.
Sounds like we'll take a George in a second.
Second.
Liz, okay. And you know, Liz, this, and I agree with you, because it's on the proposed plan up to 5 months, but when you go to the breakdown, it doesn't reference it up to, it just says 5 months, so it could be a little confusing.
Yeah, we'll adjust that. It's a good point.
Yeah, that will have to be amended.
Yeah. We already had our discussion. Unless there's any more discussion on this?
No.
No.
Motion to approve? Say aye.
Approved.
Aye.
Any nays? Motion passes. So we've already moved up item 8. There's no more motion, so
Any requests?
any requests, any additional information anybody would like to? I know CBP was here and we had an opportunity to ask, but they gave us detailed information. It looks like everything's down. I know we can kind of move forward and maybe get the reports that he provided. I don't know, were they available to us as well, or he just?
Yeah, we'll send them along.
That'd be great. I appreciate that. But anybody have any information like to provide?
I would just like to mention something, and I know with all this getting ready for the IT part of our meeting here, I did want to, and I know it's a little late, but I know that Mr. Labrada's wife passed away, and I just wanted for the record to show that we had a moment of silence because of her passing.
No, you're right. That being said, I know we could do it here at the end, so.
Yeah.
Good moment of silence, yeah. So, I'd like to have that moment of silence now. Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was going to ask, Vice Chair, Elizabeth, were you able, I know you said you were going to jump on another meeting. I know Ashley sent you a quick invite. Were you still able to join us right after this?
Yes, that training, I had 2 staff members. I'll regroup with them at 4 o'clock. I'm good.
Okay, thank you. And Amanda and John too, right? You guys are, okay, perfect. All right, thank you, everybody.
Well, first of all, I'd like to make a motion. Anybody to adjourn the meeting?
Oh, motion to adjourn.
I second.
Second, good. Thank you. Is that-